See some glimmers of sunshine in the north and the west, but this will be also accompanied by some heavy showers. And as we move through the day, the showers will develop, particularly across England and Wales. Some of them could be heavy and thundery at times. Rain continuing to just hold on to the Northern Isles, but best of the sunnier weather across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures reaching the mid-teens across the UK. Into the evening time on Thursday, we see an increased risk of those showers turning to longer spells of rain across eastern parts of England. But overnight, we'll see clearing skies for the rest of the UK. Under those clear skies, temperatures will start to drop away and we'll see a frost returning, particularly across parts of Northern Ireland into Scotland. Temperatures here falling to freezing, if not below, but just holding up in the southeast where we hold on to that cloud and rain. So it'll be a bit of a cloudy start across the far southeast to begin Friday morning, and then generally for the vast majority of the day, blue skies for much of the UK, though across eastern counties of England, thicker cloud, patchy light rain and drizzle is possible at times. Temperatures again around the mid-teens, and it stays settled into the weekend.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
from 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
As we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. On the bill of fare tonight, State of the Nation. For starters, it's the nanny state, the perennial problem posed by the pestilent proponents of New Labour. First they took your cigarettes, now they're after your cake, ale and power showers. For mains, we'll be tucking into the relentless war on motorists. When should we start investing in the infrastructure that actually matters, our motorways and A roads, rather than wasting it on the bloated and flailing beast that is HS2? And for the pudding, not so much a souffle of delight, but the day of the Triffids. The curse of the vegetables strikes again as another tyrannical vegan-only menu emerges in one of Britain's most illustrious institutions. A vegan activist will be here. He may cut the mustard, but he will butter no parsnips. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be hearing from our venerable panel, our former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the assistant editor-in-chief of the London Financial, Andy MacDonald. As ever, I want to hear from you. It doesn't cost much to keep in touch. International direct emailing, mailmog@gbnews.uk. Well, you've had your canapes. Now time for something a bit heartier with Polly Middlehurst.
Good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Nicola Sturgeon's insisted she had no prior knowledge the police would arrest her husband. Peter Murrell, the SNP's former chief executive, was arrested earlier in connection with an investigation into the party's finances. It centres around £600,000 set aside for the independence campaign. A spokesperson for Nicola Sturgeon says she'll fully cooperate with Police Scotland if required, and the First Minister Humza Yousaf says the SNP will follow suit.
We're spending as a country £6 million a day housing illegal asylum seekers in hotels. That can't be right. I've committed to reducing that number, moving asylum seekers out of hotels, and that means we need to find alternative sites, and including barges like the one we've brought forward today. That's going to save the taxpayer money, reduce pressure on hotels.
Well, that was, of course, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. He was speaking about the government's decision earlier to move asylum seekers from hotels to barges. He was claiming it will save the taxpayer millions of pounds every year. That is the barge that the Home Office have said round-the-clock security will minimise disruption to the community. But clearly it is the subject of legal challenges from the local district and Tory MPs. More on that in our later bulletins. Let's get you up to date with the story that we did bring you. That is that the SNP, the former leader, Nicola Sturgeon, insisted she had no prior knowledge that the police would arrest her husband. Peter Murrell, the former chief executive of the party, was arrested earlier. It's in connection with a Police Scotland investigation into the party finances. It centres around that £600,000 set aside for the independence campaign. Now, a spokesman for Ms Sturgeon says she's cooperating with Police Scotland if required. Now, the Prime Minister, we mentioned that already, so let's move on to the story that we've been bringing you earlier today. 21 people have been convicted of sexual offences against 7 children in Walsall who were younger than 12 when they were abused. West Midlands Police says the offences were committed over a period of almost 10 years. 3 trials have been held over the past 15 months, with reporting restrictions in place until their conclusion. The offenders will be sentenced next month. And the chair of the Blood Inquiry says compensation for victims should be extended as some family members remain unrecognised. Thousands of patients were infected with HIV and hepatitis C through contaminated products in the 1970s and the 80s. Last year, the inquiry recommended victims or their bereaved partners should receive an interim payment of £100,000. It's now urging the government to widen the scheme to include orphaned children and parents who lost their children. TV online, DAB Plus radio, and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now it is over to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, as many of you know, I'm very keen on nannies. I think they're the backbone of Britain, and they've done so much to keep the nation on the straight and narrow over the decades and centuries. But I'm not keen on the nanny state. And we seem to be hearing more and more about the nanny state interfering in our lives day after day. Say the government wants to ban wet wipes. Well, for heaven's sake, wet wipes are really important if you've got small children. With 6 children, not all of them so small anymore, I know how helpful wet wipes prove to be. It has to be said they're a bit better than somebody spitting on a handkerchief and wiping the child's face, which is always pretty disgusting. Wet wipes serve a useful purpose. They make people's lives easier. Now we hear that power showers are going to be discouraged because we don't have enough water. We've got plenty of water. The water companies may allow too much of it to leak. We may not have built any reservoirs in recent years, but there is no shortage of water in the United Kingdom. And what we need to do is meet consumer demand, not tell people that what they're doing is wrong and that their lives must be made more difficult. And then we have Patricia Hewitt, former minister under Tony Blair, calling for sin taxes. The problem with sin taxes is that they fall more on the poor than on the rich. There's an excellent Civitas report recently that points this out, and quite how much of indirect taxation takes of the lowest quintile's income compared to the highest quintile. And that's really deeply unfair, that it's one thing for governments to lecture, it's one thing for governments to tell people how to lead their lives, but to make people actively worse off because they don't like what people's doing seems to me to be entirely wrong when it's on the backs of the least well off. What government is about, what politics is about, what conservatism is about particularly, is taking the blockades out of people's lives so that they can lead the lives that they want to lead rather than the lives that people in Whitehall think are good for them. The freedom of the individual is fundamental, and the state should not be putting these extra burdens on people. But we've got, and to go back to Patricia Hewitt, this pernicious idea that because the NHS is paid for by the state, we then have to behave for the benefit of the NHS. But that's not right. The NHS isn't there for its benefit, it's there for our benefit. It's there to protect us. And we got into this muddle over COVID when we were told to protect the NHS. But that's not the way it should be. The NHS is the emergency service to look after people if they're unwell. And this is a problem that has made us more dependent, the dependency culture that Civitas pointed out, so that we've now got a point of 50% of people, our fellow citizens, being net recipients of support, but then they get taxed. So I was talking about the bottom quintile. They pay 19.3% in indirect taxes against 6.3% of the top quintile. So we give them benefits, and then we tax them on those benefits to get the money back to give it to them. It's a circular dependency culture that makes people inefficient, makes the economy slower growth, but also infantilises us because we have to be dependent on dear old nanny. Well, perhaps I've been infantile all my life, because I'm certainly dependent on nanny, but not the nanny state. But as always, I want to know what you think at home. Get in touch. Email me at mailmog@gbnews.uk. And I'm now joined by a brilliant panel, pugnacious. Pugnacious is a word created, I think, specifically for Kelvin Mackenzie, former editor of The Sun, and on his maiden appearance on GB News, Andy MacDonald, who is an independent political commentator. And I'm very pleased to welcome you, Andy.
Thank you.
Do you want to stick up for the nanny state?
I'll give it a good go, I'm sure. I mean, not so much a nanny state, but I do think that we should have a government and a kind of administration that looks after its citizens. You know, you speak about the kind of tax benefit cycle. You know, most of these benefits are being assessed as being dependent on the NHS, you know, being dependent on binmen. That's the kind of thing, not physical money being given to recipients. You know, it's a general thing that anybody could use.
But because the state provides it, we then get told what to do. So there are proposals that we should put out half a dozen different bins for the convenience of the state. Whereas actually, if you do things privately, the binmen come round to you and they do it to your convenience. So the state takes more and more control of what you do because it's providing it.
I don't think, you know, bins should be privatised and, you know, rubbish collection should be privatised. We already have enough of that with, you know, kind of private skips. I think the government and local councils particularly, I think it is down to regional councils, you know, district, borough and county councils, how they run their bin system, because I know in my home Mansfield it's very different to Nottingham because it's a different council. So, you know, this isn't a central government thing, this is a regional administration thing.
But isn't this the problem, that once the government does something, it takes control? So actually, there used to be a weekly collection. People could put whatever they like in their bins. Now they get fortnightly collections and they're fined if they put the wrong things in the bin.
Well, I must correct you on one thing. Around my way, which is Weybridge and Surrey, we get bins taken once a week. So Triumph for Elmbridge, which used to be Conservative but isn't now, and nor likely to be for some time. But the fundamental issue is that we are subsidy junkies. When you're given an option of somebody else paying, which always makes me laugh, anything that ever happens, whenever they carry out a poll, it always says in it, would you like to raise taxes to be hypothecated in some way? And more than 50%, or just around 50%, always say yes. Why is that? Because 50% don't pay income tax anymore. We have now got to an absurd situation where actually I think some very small number, like 6 or 7%, now pay way north of 50% of all income tax. This is not a fair society, because what it means is that the money is going from there and is now going over there. So there is a massive resentment. And so we've got to come out of the subsidy aspects of people's lives. But parents are to blame as well. So, for instance, I have very, very clever mum and dad. They didn't have virtually no money anyway until very, very late in their lives. And so there was no possibility of handing money to buy your house. Now every family is now saying, how can we give money to our children to buy their house? Why don't we actually say to them, wait until you're 35, 37, 38, once you've got a couple of kids, see what you've made of your life. If you haven't made anything of your life, then have this money. And if you have made something of it, honestly, you should set fair on yourself and wait for the inheritance.
But to come to water, there is plenty of water in the UK.
Yeah.
We know this on a daily basis, great topic of conversation. What business of the government is it to say don't have power showers?
Well, we know we have a lot of water. Just behind, one of the greatest rivers, I would say, across Europe, in fact. I think on the power shower issue, I think that was a variety of suggestions that were given. The river water in our country at the minute, this is a fact, is environmentally, it's a nightmare. It's not healthy. We should be using the natural water. But that's not because people have power showers. That's because of effluent going into it, which is a completely different problem at the other end. Why don't we just, as the market would do, ensure that there's greater supply? Because the raw material is there, the water is there, it's just we haven't built a reservoir, since the 1970s or something. The standard of the water just isn't good enough to take. I think that was the main issue that was being highlighted. The supply is there. We've got plenty of water in the UK, but the standard of the water is not fit for consumer usage.
But on the water issue, I absolutely object to somebody telling me whether I can have a power shower or not. And anyway, this is all pushed way into the future. It's a suggestion. Why don't they just keep these daft suggestions to themselves? There are enough issues in this world without being told that number one issue or even number two issue. And the other thing is, how much pressure is the loo water going to take, and all these other things, rather than concentrating on, are we actually creating enough water? Yes, we have enough water. How do we get it to the people who are prepared to pay quite a lot of money? Has anybody seen their water bills lately? They announce without the slightest bit of a red face at all that everything's going up 7, 10, 12%. Nobody cares. Nobody cares anymore about the size of the water bill, because compared to the energy bill, it's nothing at all. And on that energy thing, so, somebody decides, oh, isn't it disgusting? Look at those profits. Nobody ever says to a company when they're losing money, I tell you what, the government should subsidise the fact because we want to keep people in jobs.
Well, they did with the railways, for example. Over COVID.
Because it's nationalised.
Because it's become nationalised.
And it's stunningly inefficient, badly run, loses billions.
Jacob, in all fairness, it was your government that did. It
was not my government, it's His Majesty's government.
His Majesty's government did offer quite a lot of the money over the pandemic.
It's a complete racket, because most people go in their cars. It's 80% of journeys. We're getting onto that later. Yeah. But governments love railways for some eccentric reason. But let's get to sin taxes, because they really do fall hardest on the poor. The well-off can afford the amount of tax on a bottle of wine. The least well-off are hit again and again by sin taxes, a higher percentage of their income. Is this fair? Is this right?
It isn't. You know, things are unhealthy and people should be discouraged from doing things that will innately damage them. But,
right. Do you honestly believe that people should be that they should be told, look, that jam donut's not good for you? But the idea of saying that jam donut, we're going to move it on from £1.40 to £2, and in some odd way hypothecated into the National Health Service is ridiculous.
Obesity is one of the largest killers in the UK. When COVID wasn't even one of the largest killers, and we shut down the entire country for 2 years.
But that was a mistake. I mean, that's what happens when you get the nanny state. You shut down the economy, and you have worse health effects.
You can pick up a bottle of red wine from Sainsbury's for £4. You know, it might go up to £4.50. It's not really going to make a big difference.
£4?
£4.
I tell you what, I don't know where in Sainsbury's you can pick up a bottle for £4. I spend a lot of time looking for red wine. And
I can assure you, I was only the other day, I was in Sainsbury's in Mount Serial.
I'm reassured that Kelvin can't get his Mouton Rothschild for £4.50 in Sainsbury's, but it's the principle, isn't it, that the people who are imposing these taxes don't get affected by them because they are in higher economic groups and they hit their voters much harder and disproportionately, and then you get more dependency because you get the benefits having to be paid so that people actually afford the basics of life.
To an extent, yeah, but you could apply that to anything, really. I mean, for cigarettes, for example, they've been taxed to death, but people still buy them. Rich people are still going to be buying wine and jam donuts, the same as poor people are.
The least well-off are more likely to smoke, so the taxes on tobacco fall more on the least well-off.
I don't know. I wouldn't.
No, they do. I mean, this is statistically true.
But they still have to pay the same prices, whether they're poor or rich. The tax will affect everybody.
Do you think we actually focus too much time? I mean, it politically fantastic, especially if you're a socialist, to talk about the poor all day long, because doesn't it make much more sense to actually say that we are massively in favour of ambitious, potentially successful people, so that they create wealth, so that we end up in the position in America where the average earnings for a worker there now is $63,000 a year. Right? We can only dream of this issue.
But that requires freedom so that people know that if they do something they'll benefit from it, rather than the infantilisation of the nanny state.
Yes, but we're getting to the point, aren't we? No matter the taxation has got to the point under a Conservative government, and they've had some bad luck and they've had some bad leaders, but under a Conservative government where taxation is now a massive issue. Our wages are not rising fast enough, but our taxation is, and therefore people are worse off.
Well, I told you the panel would be worth listening to, so I'm very grateful to them, but don't forget to let me know what you think. You know the email by now probably better than I do, mailmog@gbnews.uk. Coming up, we're doing our best to turn to the war on the motorists, to the war for the motorists. My next guest is perhaps one of the last men standing in this battle. And of course, don't forget to stick around to hear what made the tomato blush.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Trevor says, all UK utilities should be brought into consumer ownership. The consumer should have a share in their utility companies. Utilities should be run on a non-profit basis, ensuring CEOs are not allowed to draw extortionate sales, bleeding the company dry. Well, we certainly can't have our water companies bled dry. Alison says, hello, Jacob. Your monologue was absolutely spot on. Thank you, Alison. Can you get the rest of your party to utilise their majority and change things to put what you have highlighted into reality? Thank you. And Bob says the Tory party needs to get back to basics. I'm a bit cautious about that. I think John Major tried that, and it was not ideal, but glossing over that. Right now, they're acting like a second-rate Labour government. The lockdown gave them staggering control over a compliant population, and now they can't stop. Nanny state? No, thank you. The build-up of congestion on A roads across the United Kingdom poses a significant risk to economic growth, recent reports have warned. Snail-paced traffic, as slow as it was before the horseless carriage, bottlenecks out of our vital ports, including Dover and Southampton, and delays because of construction, have stirred up trepidation amongst many about the hit to economic prosperity. In a report delivered to the Department for Transport, the government's National Infrastructure Commission also recommended that any major new road building projects should not conflict with the push for net zero. But with many roads remaining in the same state as the 1960s and the aforementioned upgrades suffering significant delays because of escalating costs, is the situation the latest in a long line of knocks to hard-working motorists? Instead of spending what is estimated to be over £100 billion on the white elephant that is HS2, why don't we focus on revitalising and modernising our essential road structure? To unpick this, I'm joined by one of the UK's most effective and perhaps most expensive in terms of the Treasury campaigners, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, Howard Cox. Howard, thank you for coming on. You're a campaigner for the motorist, but actually, isn't motorists broadly all right? We're quite happy going around in our cars, and shouldn't we spend lots of money on nice trains and buses?
That's not really reflected in my inbox. We've got 1.7 million supporters, Jacob, and one of the things that's, well, there's 3 or 4 things that worry them, like the 2030 ban, etc. But congestion is the big issue at the moment in time. People getting into cities, especially in urban conurbations, approaching cities, they are stuck in traffic jams. They don't get much faster than 20 miles an hour, and in London, I think it averages at 7 miles an hour at the moment. The problem we have at the moment is the quality of the roads. They're third world quality roads. We look at the potholes we're seeing now. Something like a third of the roads in this country are so pothole ridden they're almost impassable. These are the sorts of things I'm getting. About 6 years ago, I commissioned the CEBR, the Centre for Economic Business Research, independent economic analysts, to say what would have happened if the money outlined, or the capital outlined for HS2, that white elephant you mentioned, what would that have done for roads? And just to give you an example, it would have put an extra lane on every single motorway, dual carriageway in this country. Those are the sorts of things which we would have definitely got the traffic moving.
But how do we get to net zero if we're helping the motorist? Don't we have to bear down on the motorist to reduce emissions?
No, absolutely not. What we should be doing is incentivising motorists to move to cleaner fuels. That's one of the things we should be doing. We're not stopping people. One of the things that always fascinates me with the Sadiq Khan in London here is that he's actually saying, don't worry, bring in your dirty diesel, just give me some cash. This is the sort of approach that has. What we need is incentivise motoring in a way that actually helps the environment, and that means clean fuel technology, hydrogen, synthetic fuels, e-fuels, all those sorts of things are available. Don't put these horrible, basically, caveats in people's pockets. They can't afford to get into their car to drive around the country.
And you've been very successful in campaigning to stop the increase in fuel duty. And that's been very popular with motorists. Does it have a political consequence? Does it determine how people vote, do you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. When it comes to the crunch, people, they have no choice. They have to drive. And don't forget, fuel duty is a regressive tax. It hits low-income families more, small businesses, white van man, all those sorts of people are impacted more than anything. And as you know, when you see that pump prices have come down, inflation comes down. When pump prices go up, inflation goes up. It impacts the whole of the economy. So it is a political hot potato, and it's very, very important. And my inbox is full of people saying, who should I vote for? Who's best for drivers? And up until recently, I would have said the Tories. But I'm afraid, I'm going to say to you, Jacob, your government is not doing a good job in terms of looking after motorists. There's too many anti-car policies.
And where are these really coming from? Are they coming from our aim to get to net zero in 2050, or are they revenue raising? Or are they simply that most of the people making policy are based in central London and they therefore don't realise how central the car is for people in rural areas?
Well, really, it's all of the above, as you just said it. The net zero aim, this ridiculous, I called it a pipe dream. What's the point of doing that? We're not going to make a shed load of difference to the world in terms of that. I think it's arrogant to think that we can do something about it. And the big one, of course, is that why are we leading the world in banning diesel and petrol cars in 2030? We're only 6 years away from that. And most of the manufacturers in this country now are moving their internal combustion production lines to electric. And they're never going to be able to go back. We're being forced into this. And so in a political situation, I'm sorry to say this, but one of the biggest problems you're going to have as a Conservative government is the fact is if you don't support the motorists, you're going to lose votes and they're going to hemorrhage big time.
But nobody else will support the motorists anymore, will they? No. If you look at Sadiq Khan, who is a socialist, of course, his hostility to the motorist is very significant with the ULEZ charge.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. There's wonderful, and I've spoken to Keir Starmer about it, and he still supports everything to do with that net zero as well. And so, really, we've got something like what is it? 90% of the seats in the House of Commons want net zero. This is what people believe. I'm afraid people are going to move elsewhere. I'm afraid a lot of people are going to look at other parties. People like Reform.
And in terms of the state of the roads, you were saying the potholes. But every time I go on the M4, which I do every week, there are roadworks going on. They've just expanded it. They've got a smart motorway. It looks as if tons of money is being spent.
Well, where that money is coming from, I do not understand, because it's not going right across the country. There are certain arteries that are benefiting from that sort of thing. But most of the problem we have at the moment in time is there's lack of investment in roads across the country, especially going across the country. The M4 is a good example, but most going up and down, we talked about HS2, or we're talking about going north-south, but we need to count motorways and dual carriageways going across the country. But above all, just start listening to drivers. The stakeholders never listen to. We're just told what we're going to get, and that's one of the problems, and that's what I'm fighting for.
And so you're well beyond the Fair Fuel campaign now.
Yes.
You want to see more space for the motorist on the road. How do you allow motorists and cyclists to compete for the road space? What would you do in London, on the embankment, for instance?
Well, I'd certainly get rid of that cycle lane. I'm sorry, if I became mayor, for example, I'd get rid of ULEZ, and I'd get rid of local traffic neighbourhoods, and I'd also get rid of cycle lanes, down to a more manageable size. There's too many cycle lanes now. You can get an HGV truck down the cycle lane. Where did that come from?
OK, you say if you became mayor, are you going to stand from that?
I'm being asked to do that sort of thing, and I am looking at my options.
It's the challenge I always give to the Greens, who come along and, you know, and glue themselves to things.
I'm not saying
Why not stand for election?
I'm not saying no.
Is this a GB News exclusive? I think it may be, that Mr Cox may be a candidate for Mayor for London when that comes up. But thank you, Howard. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.uk. Still ahead. We'll be breaking an exclusive with one of my very own GB News and Conservative Party colleagues. And don't forget, about this evening's denouement. Find out why all vegetables have to go through shepherd's bush.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. June says, we want to live our own lives, not to be told how we should live them. We're not a communist country. Why do some people think we can't look after ourselves and make our own decisions? I think lockdown has softened our brains. Harry says, HS2 would be ridiculous to cancel now, as there's been too much money spent on it already. Yes, it's a waste of money, but if you cancel it now, it will only be a waste of money. Get it built and move on. This isn't right. This ignores the sunk cost fallacy, but never mind. We'll discuss that another day. And Douglas, I think you win this week's cream egg. Says politicians are the servant of the people, not the other way round. I agree with that. And one of the titles of the Pope is Servus Servorum Dei, the servant of the servants of God. Baedeker famously said in his tourist guide that if you didn't have time to visit both Oxford and Cambridge, just visit Oxford. I think the Michelin Guide will no doubt do the same if Darwin College's herbivistic tendencies spread. Darwin College, Cambridge has announced the first vegan-only menu at its end-of-year ball. £225, without so much as a ham sandwich or a cream bun. Sounds about as tedious as watching the grass grow, but if you ask me, but that's possibly a rather luscious thing to do if you're a herbivore. You see the grass go, you see your dinner coming along. Anyway, enough what I think. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. We asked the people what they thought about vegan-only menus, and the people have spoken.
Concentrating too much on vegan is not helpful for the body, because
everybody needs variety, and that's why I don't appreciate vegan-only food.
I don't mind that at all. I've got vegans in the family, so it doesn't bother me, and I'll eat what they eat as well.
If people want to eat vegan, let them, and let the meat eaters eat meat. I'm sorry, but I'm a carnivore, so, you know, I like my meat.
I'm delighted to be joined by Rory Cockshaw, the campaigner at the vegan charity Viva. Rory, first of all, thank you for coming, and you came for us last night and came again today, so I'm really grateful.
No worries.
£225 for a dinner where you're not going to get any meat, if you're a meat eater, doesn't seem very good value for money.
I'd say £225 for most dinners is not fantastic value for money. Here the question isn't about meat, the question is times are changing. Your first tweet when you joined Twitter, 15th of July 2017, was tempora mutantur, times change and we change with them, et nos mutamur in illis. I think I've pronounced that right.
I'm very impressed.
Thank you very much.
Looked up my first tweet.
I did. But times are changing and we do need to change with them. We know that the climate is evolving. No, so about 85% of the UK farmland is actually for feeding cows, feeding sheep.
Pasture land, yeah.
Pasture land, exactly. This is a huge opportunity cost. If the world were to go vegan tomorrow, hypothetically speaking, we would actually need 75% less land to grow the same amount of food. Now, that's not just important environmentally, that's important in terms of food equity. People around the world are starving. There's 1 billion people without enough food. If we were to go vegan tomorrow, we could actually grow enough plant-based food to feed everybody, which is a massive deal.
But we do feed everybody. The ability to grow food has come about because of technological innovations, and you've seen this since Malthus wrote, saying that we would run out of food. Actually, agricultural productivity has increased by 2% a year, and there is sufficient food grown to feed the whole world, and that people's diets have improved as they've taken on more meat and dairy, which has given them stronger bones, they've grown taller. This has been hugely beneficial for mankind.
The important question is whether or not that's sustainable. So there's a book called 60 Harvests Left, which says that actually we don't actually have that much time left, and that's all down to soil health. What we need to do is adopt a food system which is efficient in terms of land usage, efficient in terms of resource production, efficient in terms of energy usage, and the most efficient way of producing food is simply a plant-based one. Reason being, you're taking an entire level out of the food chain. You're no longer feeding all of that food to animals, you're feeding it straight to humans, and you can do amazing things with it. So Darwin College, Cambridge, which has gone plant-based for the first time at their Mabel this year, their food is going to be amazing, and they've said themselves, this body of students, have said they wouldn't have done this unless they knew they could provide tasty, delicious food and better than the normal standard.
But surely that's a matter of taste, and if you're paying this £225, you should be entitled to choose a meat diet if that's what you want.
Sure, but you pay £225 for a meal, you get given a whole array of food, some of which you like, some of which you don't like. That's the case whether you're serving meat or not.
But this is very dirigiste, isn't it? It's saying you can only have plant-based food.
But there's a huge variety of plant-based food. So the average omnivore, back when I ate meat, back when I ate dairy, a number of years ago now, I would eat the same kind of 5 animals on rotation, plus a handful of plants, bananas and carrots and so forth. Now that I've gone vegan, actually, my diet has increased in terms of the plants that I eat vastly. I eat all sorts of ingredients now that I never had before, and they're all delicious.
Well, that's a matter of taste, though, isn't it?
Well, everything's... of course.
But that's right. But this is stopping people having the taste that they actually want, so that people like me who like cream and like butter and like meat, why should we be forced to eat vegetables? I don't much like any vegetables, not compared to meat or cream.
Sure, but you can actually now have stuff which is cream, which is meat, tastes like cream, but it's plant-based. You can have amazing things. If you go down the local supermarket...
I'm very suspicious of this taste like. That imitation... Do you remember all those adverts there used to be for things that weren't butter but tasted like butter? They never did. They're always disgusting.
Sure, well, again, that's a matter of taste.
That's right. But it's the trying to enforce it that is the issue.
Sure, so the matter of enforcing, there's always this trope about vegans, we're forcing our diets down the throats of other people. The question more is, are you forcing your diet down the throats of animals as well, and around people around the world? And also, in terms of climate change, you can make a choice. I'm not going to tell you what to eat tonight, of course, but when you do go and eat tonight, you have a choice. Do you want to eat something which tastes good but destroys the planet, kills animals and harms people around the world?
Well, I think the evidence that it destroys the planet is very limited.
I know, it's very...
Actually, the countryside that we have is created because of the way we farm, that the beauty of England is created by our farmers.
So the beauty of England is because we deforested it hundreds of years ago in order to raise cattle. It would be far more beautiful if it still had the forest that it once had, which we could have if we shifted to a plant-based food system.
It would be very difficult for us to live in an England that was entirely forested, and we've got more forest now than we have had since the Middle Ages, because trees have been regrowing on marginal land, because agricultural techniques have got better. But you've got to be able to grow the food that you need, and that a lot of the land in Somerset, for instance, is fit for pasture land. It's not going to be fit for growing cereals.
Of course, but we have almost no ancient forests, which is a massive biodiversity issue. There's something like 1 million species around the world which are currently endangered, and the leading cause of biodiversity loss, Viva campaigned on this last year in a thing called Eating the Earth, is actually eating meat, fish, dairy and eggs, which is a huge deal. If we were to stop eating meat, fish, dairy and eggs, have delicious plant-based options instead, not only would we get a forest back, but we'd also have huge amounts of biodiversity benefit as well.
But we'd lose quite a lot of species, because what's going to happen to all the cattle and all the sheep?
Well, we'd still have those in sanctuaries and so forth, but we
just have a few in sanctuaries.
We only breed those into existence by the billion in order to kill them a short amount of time after they're born.
Not necessarily a short amount of time, and they lead. I mean, a milk cow will live to about 10, if not older. It's a full life.
They're killed on average about 4.5 years of age.
Yeah, but a milk cow goes on.
No, so they're actually also killed about 4.5 years of age, milk cows. Then the male calves are basically killed almost immediately. They're sold into the veal or the beef industries.
But they taste very good.
Because they're useless. They taste very good, and I actually agree with you. But
so
I would
why
say
should we
that
deprive
sensory
ourselves
pleasure,
of things that taste good when these cows, they otherwise wouldn't live at all?
Because sensory pleasure is not more important than the life of a sentient
I'm sorry to cut you short, but apparently we've got to go to the break. But for those waiting for the answers to my questions, the tomato blushed, as you know, because it's all the salad dressing, and vegetables go through shepherd's bush because it's the way to turn them green. Up next, a GB News exclusive. Hold on to your seats.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. You've been getting in touch with your mail mogs. Peter says, we need to aim at zero emissions, but it's too expensive to do it quickly. I rather agree with this. And we are a small landmass in this world of consuming. Jimmy, if I hadn't already awarded the cream egg, I mean, this is fantastic. If God hadn't wanted us to eat meat, he wouldn't have made animals so tasty. What a great idea. And Sandy, well, thank you, Sandy, for your message. Jacob, I'm a new viewer and really enjoy the discussions you have. I'm a very old lady, but I've learnt so much from your programme. I also benefit greatly from living in Somerset. Well, everyone who lives in Somerset benefits from living there, so I'm very glad we've got viewers in God's own county. But some news from you all. The Times, the greatest newspaper in the world, has just broken a story concerning the Conservative MP, Scott Benton. The report claims Mr Benton was prepared to help business interests influence policymakers and provide access to behind-the-scenes information. What you probably haven't read is that the Times, in fact, ran an attempted sting operation on a great GB News friend, the incorruptible Mr Philip Davis. But he and GB News Investigates reporter Charlie Peters saw right through it and outstung the sting. We've asked the Times for comment. They haven't responded, but they can get in touch if they want to, as they know it doesn't cost much to keep in touch. But Charlie Peters reported earlier.
It's always a gamble when a newspaper decides to launch an undercover sting, particularly when it involves Westminster MPs. Conservative politicians are particularly under the spotlight, with Matt Hancock, Kwasi Kwarteng and other high-profile Tories recently caught out asking for eye-watering sums for consulting work. Today, it was revealed that Tory MP Scott Benton had been stung by an undercover operation from The Times. The MP for Blackpool South was caught on camera, seemingly ready to support an investment fund to influence policymakers and obtain gambling policy information, despite rules blocking MPs for lobbying for cash. But we can reveal how the Times operation failed to ensnare another backbench Tory and GB News presenter Philip Davies. And the GB News Investigates team caught them on camera. After he was approached, Mr Davies contacted the GB News Investigates team, thinking something fishy was going on. Tar Partners, the fake firm who snared Benton and who had approached him too, purported to be an investment firm for an Indian multi-millionaire family, but it was not what it seemed. GB News visited what they claimed were their offices and found no trace of them. Their office landline went to an overflow company who'd only started taking calls in the last week. The cover was sloppy to say the least. The man who reached out to Mr Davies, William Kent, had a suspicious LinkedIn profile. He turned out to be a senior journalist at The Times. GB News Investigates also uncovered that his colleague Alamu, supposedly the niece of the multi-millionaire Indian businessman, was also a Times journalist. In their conversation with Mr Davies, the MP for Keighley, the investigative journalists from The Times said that in India, the rules for lobbying politicians were different, and they were trying to bring that system here.
Working there for many decades, and relationships have always been quite an important part of how he works, which is kind of why we usually try and strip out the middleman essentially, and just kind of we look for people that have their finger on the pulse but are happy to kind of within what they're allowed to do, just kind of give us a bit of a heads up of what's coming up, you know, what areas are helpful for us to look into and find people to bring on. So we're just trying to get an idea of how things work here essentially politically and what you can and can't do really. Thanks for fitting us in.
Benton, who says he had only agreed to the fake firm to find out what the role entailed, might have fallen foul of the sting. But in the case of our very own Phil Davies, they couldn't sting the stingers.
So much for coming in. You have stung the stingers, but do you think this type of journalism is fair and is actually beneficial to try and keep the British body politic honest?
I think so, yes, because I think it exposes behaviours from politicians when they don't realise they're being exposed. I mean, investigative journalism of this sort is very useful, but I suppose my intention here, after I realised that I was dealing with a sting, was to try and, I don't know, through criticism, improve the process. I mean, I thought the LinkedIn profile was sloppy, the lack of office was really lazy, and the overflow firm, they were very delighted to tell me that they'd only started taking calls a week ago. So there is definitely a space for this kind of journalism. I have to say, at the time, when I first saw the story, I thought they were legitimate originally. I thought the story I was going to sting there, possibly going to that hotel, was that I really was going to encounter someone trying to bend the rules.
Oh, so you thought that you might find a crooked company that was trying to suborn MPs and then found that it was actually a sting?
We were almost certain that it was a sting, but the remote chance of 5% that it could be something legitimate made it even more exciting.
And will you be looking to do other stings? Are you going to be the GB News stinger?
GB News Investigates exists for this reason and for these kind of stories. So absolutely, we'll keep an eye out on these things. And I think we also should pay attention to the excellent work that the Times has done here in luring some MPs into trying to bend the rules in some way. And, you know, Scott Benton has issued a defence that we covered in that report. But still, I think they've really exposed something great there.
Well, I'm very pleased that Philip Davis is able to join us. Philip, you're modelling yourself on Lot, the one just man who had to be found in the cities of the plain. What did you feel about it when you discovered that you were being set up, and what alerted you to the sting?
Well, I received an email from this company purporting to be an Indian company wanting to invest in the UK, and it smelt fishy to me, to be honest, Jacob. The whole thing didn't smell right. They were trying to invest certain sums of money, which, in the scheme of things, wasn't actually a fat lot, but they wanted somebody who would be able to advise them on regulation of this and regulation of that. It didn't ring true, and so I contacted Charlie and said, look, I think this is some kind of fake company, I think, or some kind of sting. And, you know, as journalists, I thought it was interesting to go along and see the kind of tactics that they employed when carrying out this kind of activity.
And do you think it's fair for newspapers to act as agent provocateur?
Yeah, I think it's. I've got mixed feelings about it, Jacob, to be honest. I mean, yes, of course, you know, the media's there to hold us to account. And I certainly don't complain about them doing that. They're there to try and expose wrongdoing and all the rest of it. But look, I mean, it's a pretty grubby tactic. I mean, it's not as if people are doing this. It's not as if they have heard that somebody is doing something wrong and they want to then try and expose them for doing something wrong. They're trying to catch out people who, to the best of everybody's knowledge, have never done anything wrong, and try to get them to do something wrong. And I, you know, I don't know whether that's a legitimate tactic or not. I'm sure most people think it is, but you know, I've got mixed feelings about it myself.
And how much malpractice do you think there is in Westminster at the moment? Do you think that the two stings we've had recently are showing that we are back to the bad old days of the 1990s, or with the new approach to standards that we've had, are we in a much better place than we were then?
I think, Jacob, and I would like to think you would feel the same, that we've got the most honest, incorruptible politics in the whole of the world. And I think sometimes we take that too much for granted. And so, you know, I still maintain that that politics in the UK is very, very clean and honest and straightforward. If there is any wrongdoing, I think it is very, very minor in very, very exceptional cases. But look, that's no defence for the people who do things wrong. They should be exposed, and that's what journalists are there for. But I do think that the politics in the UK is probably the straightest in the world.
Well, thanks very much, Philip. Actually, when my father was editor of the Times, he approved a sting operation, so I certainly think that journalists are entitled to do it and to keep our politics clean. Anyway, that's all from us. Up next is Dan Wootton. Mr. Wootton, what's in store this evening?
My goodness, Jacob, what a seismic day in politics on both sides of the Atlantic. So here we've got the Tory party deputy chairman, Lee Anderson, to take it all down. And we also have joining us from across the Atlantic, Megyn Kelly. I cannot wait for her take on the Donald Trump debacle.
Well, it's always a good evening when Lee Anderson is on. Thank you, Dan. That's all coming up after the weather, and you won't want to miss it. I'm not here tomorrow, but I'm back next week. But we're now getting the weather, and let's hope there's no Storm Daniels this evening.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest broadcast from the Met Office. There is quite a lot of cloud across the UK at the moment. Outbreaks of rain followed by heavy showers, but it should turn drier from Friday and into the Easter weekend. Low pressure in charge at the moment, bringing that cloudier, wetter weather, but we will see through into Good Friday and into the weekend, high pressure starting to move in, settles things down for the vast majority of the weekend. So this evening, a lot of cloud across the UK, outbreaks of rain pushing slowly eastward, some heavier bursts possible, turning drier into the early hours from the west, but the risk of some heavy showers, particularly over Northern Ireland during the early hours. Temperatures holding up well above freezing due to the cloud and outbreaks of rain, but it means quite a grey start to Thursday morning. We will see some glimmers of sunshine in the north and the west, but this will be also accompanied by some heavy showers. And as we move through the day, the showers will develop, particularly across England and Wales. Some of them could be heavy and thundery at times. Rain continuing to just hold on to the Northern Isles, but best of the sunnier weather across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Temperatures reaching the mid-teens across the UK. Into the evening time on Thursday, we see an increased risk of those showers turning to longer spells of rain across eastern parts of England. But overnight, we'll see clearing skies for the rest of the UK. Under those clear skies, temperatures will start to drop away and we'll see a frost returning, particularly across parts of Northern Ireland into Scotland. Temperatures here falling to freezing, if not below, but just holding up in the southeast where we hold on to that cloud and rain. So it'll be a bit of a cloudy start across the far southeast to begin Friday morning, and then generally for the vast majority of the day, blue skies for much of